In the previous video, we covered Battle Network 2 and why that entry plays such an important role in Battle Network's overall growth. If you want a more detailed explanation, I suggest you go back and watch that video when you're able to. The biggest takeaway from that video is that Battle Network 2 introduced and refined a lot of things that overall made the series a much better experience moving forward. But this also presents a challenge that some games fail to overcome, that challenge being, how can you possibly provide a follow-up to an amazing sequel that brought so much to the table on its own? Well, Battle Network 3 manages to do that and then some. There is a reason why if you were to go ahead and ask a lot of Battle Network fans what their favorite entry is, or what is considered to be the best, many of them will claim that it is the third entry without hesitation. And if you are unsure why the game has such high praise, hopefully I will be able to unravel that mystery for you. The story begins right after the events of Battle Network 2 with the defeat of Gospel and peace have been restored. After a school field trip to Scilab, the group decides to hang out for the afternoon, only to be approached by a man named Tsuneyama informing Land and Company about the N1 Grand Prix, which is a huge tournament that will be taking place later on, and they will be running events all throughout the network to seek out the most talented net battlers. So of course, everyone is on board and spends the rest of the day clearing out the first round preliminaries. But after all of that was said and done, Dex realizes that he left his homework at school and everyone offers to help him retrieve it despite the fact that it's well into the evening. This is also the only time throughout the series where we get to run around in ACD at night. Anyway, Lan and the others manage to secure Dex's homework disc without any issue, but on the way out, they encounter a burglar who manages to place everyone under a hypnosis with the exception of Lan, and we find out that he's after an item called the Tetra Code, something we're gonna learn more about later on. Lan manages to save his friends by defeating the burglar's net Navi, Flashman, but not without suffering casualties as Flashman releases one final attack which ends up cooking the transmission program in Lan's PET. This is why as the story progresses up to a certain point, Mega Man's speech is buggy, followed by losing all of his communication with Lan outright, preventing him from being able to jack out or have chips sent his way, which happens right after clearing the second preliminary round for the N1. Good timing or bad timing, you decide. Anyway, it's right here we get a bit of insight on what's going on and why the school became a place of interest. It turns out that World 3 is back, with Wily looking healthy as ever despite getting blown to bits when his previous base was destroyed. We don't know anything about the doctor's plans though, we just know that he's back in action and he's after the Tetra Codes. The rest of the story plays out with World 3 committing one net crime after the next, except unlike how they've done things in the first game, their methods are more organized and far more threatening than before. I mean, we're talking about wild animals going berserk at a zoo, a hospital getting stripped of its energy resource and causing blockades everywhere, endangering a lot of patients who could be going under crucial operations, and bubbles that are set to detonate after a certain amount of time had elapsed. Okay, maybe that last one didn't sound as threatening until you realize that these bubbles will explode in the same manner as an actual bomb going off. Look, this is a Mega Man game where exploding bubbles is nothing new. But on top of all of this, a big tournament is being cooked up for our heroes to take part in. So while the duo is occupied with stopping World 3's plans for destruction of Net Society, Lan and Mega Man also need to make sure that they are prepared for the N1 Grand Prix when it arrives. However, during the main event, it is later revealed that this was all just an elaborate setup to announce the return of World 3 and take out the ace battler Chad in the process, wanting to make an example out of him. Now before I jump into the next segment, I want to shift the focus onto the tournament arc for a bit. One of the many praises this game has under its belt is how it was able to provide its players with one of the most fun story-based events throughout the entirety of the series, and that is because of its execution. From the beginning, the story establishes that a tournament will be taking place later on down the road, and rather than letting it become an afterthought with everything else going on, the game will give the players interactive reminders so that it will remain in their heads while they are playing. Having the player actively take part in the preliminaries, followed by the rivalries that will forge throughout the story, adds to that build-up until you finally reach the main event where only the best net battlers will square off against each other. There was never a time where the events surrounding the tournament felt out of place, and it also didn't take away from the game's overall plot with World 3. Then when the tournament finally does happen, the game zeroes in on this event only while adding its own layer of tension and suspense as the entire event continues to play out. Also, I can't be the only one who thought this guy looked like a character straight from Mega Man Legends. You go from competing against each other in a survival-based environment, followed by carrying out the rest of the battles on the main stage, fighting our way to the end to show the world who is the best net battler of them all. Even when World 3 ripped the glory right from under us, it still added to the overall greatness of the arc, mainly because if this was your first time playing this game, just like in the characters in the actual story, we all got duped too. This is also on par with what the villains would actually do. Besides, we all get treated to this nice cutscene, which in my opinion is Battle Network's storytelling at its peak. I want y'all to understand that according to Dr. Hikari, that PET is reinforced so much that not even an elephant can crush it. Tsuneyama should not be standing after that. Then again, we did hear a distinct metal sound when the PET smacked him, so for all we know, Tsuneyama likely has a metal implant in his head somewhere. Either way, the tournament arc will go down in history as one of the best arcs to take place in all of Battle Network. The build-up, the pacing, the fact that all of the events do not derail the story in any way is the perfect example on how to properly execute an impactful moment in any RPG without taking away too much from what the game is trying to do. This, however, is not the only high point this game does well in regards of its storytelling. The plot has plenty of other notable moments that deserves the same level of praise, like being able to establish new characters that play a very important role in the story later on. Mamoru being a good example of this, seeing as how you learn later on that he is the king of the internet, and he also bears the same disease that ended Mega Man's life as Hub. Or the fact that in this particular title, Lan's ego as a hero is played up here, and he royally gets humbled by one of Worlds 3's reoccurring villains, Mr. Match, whom at this point I just realized he's the only reoccurring World 3 member throughout all the games. In that arc, Lan gets a heavy dose of character development, seeing as how his naivete had almost roasted his father and several Scilab employees alive, and this rightfully puts him in a low point for a while before his rival snaps him back into reality. I'm telling ya, Battle Network 3's writing is really good stuff here. Anyway, we soon learn what World 3 is really up to and why they're going out of their way to get these Tetra codes. The codes are needed in order to access this powerful monster by the name of Alpha that is currently sealed away. Alpha is pretty much a prototype version of the internet back then, but due to going berserk and absorbing everything that it touched, practically to the point where the entire network was destroyed, Alpha had to be sealed away. But retrieving the codes and securing Alpha was only part 1 of the plan, as part 2 required the cooperation of Base because he is strong enough to destroy the Guardian program, which was keeping the rest of Alpha sealed away. While he was working behind the scenes in Battle Network 2, taking advantage of Sean's anger to create Gospel and make a copy of Base in order to break Alpha's seal. However, Wily no longer needed a copy as he manipulated the real Base to help Wily out by turning Base's motivation against him. That motive being to obtain more power so he can destroy every human in existence. Now, Base made this declaration at the end of Battle Network 2, insulted by the fact that Gospel was making copies of him. However, the reasoning for his hatred towards humans is far deeper than that. Battle Network 3 briefly touches on Base's past as to why he hates humans so much, saying that humans were trying to have him deleted shortly after he was created. But here's the full scoop of what really went down. You see, Base is the first independent Navi that was created by this world's version of Dr. Cossack. As the term implies, the independent Navi can fully live and function without the need of an operator. He was also installed with a Get Ability program, which allows Base to assimilate the abilities of deleted Navis and viruses alike, pretty much the equivalent of Mega Man's copying ability from the classic series. Shortly after his creation, that is when the destruction of the network began, which was being caused by Alpha. Scilab initially put the blame on Base and sent a team of elite Navis to delete him, but Base barely survives the attack and spends the rest of his days hanging on to dear life by a thread. This is also why he has that permanent scar across his Navi emblem, and this incident is also where his hatred for humans began. From that point forward, he was assaulted by viruses, absorbing them along with the Navis that were defeated, building up his strength over time and became the most powerful net Navi in existence. And what kept him living was his motivation to acquire more power so that one day he could end all human life. So of course, when Wily proposed him with the method to gain the power he needed to carry out his goal, Base was willing to work with the Doctor and even made it perfectly clear that he had no interest in Wily's plans whatsoever. Every human is a target for Base, including Wily. At this point in the game, the network is now being absorbed by Alpha, and the game will show you the effects of this happening when you log on onto the network and see that it has gone from having these vibrant colors representing each area to now having these dull appearances instead. This is also followed by the tanks that are now placed all over the cities and towns, further signifying that the world's destruction is near. Lan, Dex, Chaude, and Tora, an individual you met during the tournament arc, will set off to raid Wily's base, encountering the same World 3 goons they've defeated in the past, while the group makes their way up to where Wily is located. While they are raiding Wily's base, they also discover that World 3 is using another piece of Forbidden Scilab technology, which allows humans to pulse themselves into the cyber world. And as you can imagine, if the human gets deleted while they are in there, their body will cease to respond and, well, they pretty much kick the bucket. Very much like another piece of technology most of us are familiar with. The operators were using these to fully synchronize with their Navis to make them stronger, but due to how strong Mega Man is up to this point, they just proceeded to drop like flies. When our heroes finally caught up to Wily, they are not able to progress any further unless Lan and Mega Man use the same pulse technology to access where Alpha is being kept. Despite how dangerous this is, Lan uses the pulse system and fully synchronizes with Mega Man to have the final showdown against Wily and Base. This time, we are up against the real Base and not some fake from the previous game. And while he isn't as strong as he could be compared to his previous entries as a secret boss, he is still going to give you a run for your money. Once he has been taken down, any chance of Base forgiving humans is immediately diminished in the next scene because Wily outright betrays him here as Alpha absorbs him on the spot. But karma swiftly came knocking on Wily's door as Alpha ended up absorbing him too. That is when Alpha finally showed itself, and a final battle follows up shortly after. The fight against Alpha is also nothing to scoff at either. On top of having a whopping 2,000 health pool and a body you need to damage enough times in order to actually harm him, he will assault you with a variety of attacks that can deal quite a lot of damage. The fight is slightly easier if you have the gut style and abuse the machine gun, more on that later, or the wood style's tornado charge shot, as either can melt Alpha's shield. Otherwise, you're going to have to use a decently damaging chip followed up with a heavy hitter if you want to make your attacks count. Gospel was one thing, but Alpha definitely ramped up the difficulty as far as these final bosses go. And of course, you can't have such a battle without being accompanied by a theme that matches just how tense things have gotten up to this point. With Alpha defeated, it leaves behind a mysterious door leading to a hidden data file that existed within Alpha itself, along with the personality of Tadashi Hikari, also known as Lan's grandfather. He is also one of the scientists responsible for Alpha's creation. This personality was left behind with the purpose of keeping the Guardian intact and preventing Alpha's reawakening, but with both the Guardian and Alpha deleted, this place was going to be deleted as well. He leaves Lan with an encrypted message to give to his father before he and Mega Man left while Alpha's data space was falling apart. Just as our heroes was about to leave, one last piece of Alpha was still living, and it manages to absorb the duo before they even had a chance to escape. And with Alpha reaching its final moments of its life, Lan and Mega Man were going to be deleted along with it. But in one final moment, Mega Man used all of his remaining power to create an opening for Lan to escape with no means of getting out himself. Lan at first did not want to leave his Navi behind, and understandably so, as we have to remember, this is not just a net Navi. This is his own brother, someone who is more than just a net Navi to him. Mega Man even spoke to Lan as if he was still Hub during their last moments together, and I'll admit it, this nailed me in the feels when I played this when I was younger. I mean, his dad even admits that he regrets making such an advanced Navi because now his son had to experience the loss of both his net Navi and his brother at the exact same time. But Lan reassures his father that it was not a mistake, and both he and Mega Man will always be connected no matter what. 6 months later, Lan had pretty much gone without a Navi, refusing to get a new one. But his movement to the 6th grade required him to have a Navi. So younger me initially thought that if there was going to be a Battle Network after this, Lan was going to get something like a Mega Man X equivalent. But in a turn of events, that encrypted message Tadashi left behind had led Dr. Hikari to a place where Alpha could not reach, which is not only where Tadashi's personality was stored, but also Mega Man himself. Because of this, Dr. Hikari was able to restore Mega Man, and the two brothers were reunited, ready to tackle the upcoming challenges that they will face in the future. I can easily say that if the Battle Network series had concluded after the third entry, this would have definitely been a good stopping point. World 3 came to an end, Lan is reunited with Mega Man, and a lot of loose ends that the second game left behind have been wrapped up, and it was all neatly tied together in a wonderful conclusion. Along with a good main story, the people you encounter also added to the game's experience as they provided their own level of charm and funny moments. To this day, I still pick the incorrect answers during the boyfriend side quest, and I still get a good laugh when you catch this guy talking smack about his job only to try and play it off later. It is for this reason that if this is your first time playing through the game's story, I urge that you take your time and play through the game at your own pace, take in the sights, and enjoy it for what it is. I can assure you, you are going to have a wonderful time. Alright, so now let's talk about what Battle Network 3 brings to the table in regards of improving the gameplay itself, because like 2, Battle Network 3 introduces a good number of features that will remain throughout the entire series. We'll start with your chips and the library. Battle chips now have been placed under 3 different categories, each with a certain color to go along with it. You've got your standard battle chips, which will have the same white color as usual, but with a limitation. From now on, players can only store up to 4 copies of the same chip, which is a common rule across many traditional card games. Then you have your mega chips, which are classified by the blue color that these chips will have. All of the Navi chips you acquire will now fall under this category, and you will also be allowed to only have 1 copy of the same mega chip in the folder. This was done to prevent players from abusing certain chips, as you used to be able to have multiple copies of it at a time. Players are also limited to only 5 mega chips at a time, which can be expanded upon later on. Finally, we have giga chips. These are the strongest chips that you can acquire, and they can be identified with the pink color these chips will have. Because they are so strong, players can only have 1 of these chips in their folder at all times. Now, along with these folder and chip rebalancing, Battle Network 3 introduces a whole new system in the form of the Navi customizer. Mega Man no longer needs to collect power-ups in order to increase his stats like he did in the previous games. Now, if you want to upgrade Mega Man, you'll need to reprogram him by installing various Navi customizer parts to increase the stats of his buster or provide all kinds of abilities to cater more towards your playstyle, which is another cool feature this game introduces and will stick around for the rest of the series. Your grid will start off small at first, but as you progress through the game, the memory grid will be expanded upon, allowing you to have more programs. Customizing Mega Man is pretty simple, but there are several rules that the player needs to keep in mind when doing so. These program parts, which are a solid color, must be placed on the command line in order for the program to work. If you don't do that, not only Mega Man will become buggy, but the program effects won't take place either. Then we have the plus parts, which have a texture on them and cannot be placed on the command line at all. So you can slap these anywhere else and you'll be fine. Then you have to make sure none of the programs with the same colors are touching each other, and as long as these conditions are met, Mega Man will boot up with no problems at all. Now, there are a few exceptions to this rule, as some programs will cause Mega Man to become buggy no matter what. Like the Buster Max program, for example. It will maximize all of Mega's stats in regards of his buster, but every chip you load up will immediately be used, so it's wise to build your folder around that drawback. Another additional rule to keep in mind is what colors Mega Man is allowed to run. At the top right of your custom window, you'll see these colored slots which can tell you what colors you're allowed to use, and they will change based on Mega Man's style. And if you try to install any colors that are outside of that ruling, Mega Man will encounter an error and won't boot up. The only way to get around this is to use mod tools which you can acquire later on in the game, and then you need to provide the corresponding error code so that Mega Man can finally boot up. Just going to say this now, this color limit will no longer be a thing in future installments, but it will be implemented in a different way. I'll elaborate more on that when the time comes. If you were to disobey any of the rules I've stated before, this will result in Mega Man encountering a bug, which can have varying effects depending on what is causing that bug to begin with. This can range from having your health ticking away every time you open up your custom window, or having a hard time controlling Mega Man's movements. The bugs can also have different levels to them depending on how badly you've loaded your programs into Mega Man. There are some cases, however, where bugs can be helpful, and if you think outside the box, you may use them to your advantage. The game will also know that you've loaded a bug when Mega Man tells you he's feeling funny, and if you look at his sprite in the status menu, he'll become more static-like. Since I've brought this up several times now, I say now it's a good time to talk about the style change system. Style change has returned from Battle Network 2 and functions almost exactly the same. Depending on how you battle against viruses and other Navis alike, you'll acquire a new form along with an element that is completely random. The 4 styles, Guts, Shield, Team, and Custom, all make a return from Battle Network 2, and 3 new styles are introduced in Battle Network 3. Those styles being Bug, which is found in both versions, Ground, which can only be acquired in white, and Shadow, which is only obtainable in blue. The biggest change you mainly need to be aware of across all these styles is what happens when they level up. In Battle Network 2, their elemental charge shot has had its damage output increase. However, in Battle Network 3, you'll be rewarded with a Navi customizer program that you can install in the Mega Man, allowing him to use some of the style's abilities without needing to equip the style itself, like having an additional chip slot or being able to deploy a shield. This pretty much allows you to expand on Mega Man's abilities however you see fit. This of course means that your charge shot will no longer gain an increase in damage upon leveling up. Instead, you'll need to rely on a Navi customizer part called Weapons Level, which will do just that. Now, let's talk about those 3 new styles this game introduces. Bug is pretty self-explanatory, as it is a style that focuses on using the bugs to your advantage, and Mega Man is even sporting a new visual appearance that is similar to Gospel, showing our boy he is now one with the bugs. At the beginning of each fight, Mega Man will start the battle with 2 helpful bugs and 1 that is more of a hindrance. These bugs are also selected at random. They can range from giving Mega Man invincibility at the start to having access to all of Mega Man's available chip slots from the get-go. On the other hand, he could also suffer an HP bug which can drain his health as the fight goes on, or a jammed buster. As cool as this style looks, I didn't quite use this one as often and mainly got it just so I can gain access to the Navi customizer parts it can provide upon leveling up. Getting bug is very straightforward. All you gotta do is mess up your Navi customizer and keep fighting until the style change happens. Ground style is the white version exclusive, and you can tell you've acquired this one when you see a new pair of Yeezys Mega Man has on his feet. With ground style, your charge attacks will crack the panels, which is highly effective if you happen to have fire or wood as your element, and the programs you get upon leveling up will let you start the battle off with your elemental stage of choice. Abusing ground alternating chips like panel outs, chips that can change the stage, or even Navis that can cause panel destruction like Gutsman will help you unlock this one. Finally, you'll get to show everyone your ninja way with Shadow style, exclusive to the blue version. With Mega Man sporting a really cool scarf and even gaining a helmet resembling a ninja hood, Mega Man will adopt a fighting style that will make him a bit difficult to catch if the player masters the abilities this style provides. Your charge shot will now make Mega Man invisible for 1 second, which if timed correctly can allow Mega Man to avoid incoming damage. It also has a very short charge time, so using it in succession when needed is encouraged. Also, when you level up this style to maximum, it will gain you the anti-damage program. Pressing B and backwards just as you're about to get hit will cause Mega Man to take no damage, and he'll throw a shuriken where the enemy is standing. It's very satisfying to pull off and can really help you out in a lot of tough situations. If you want to strike from the shadows, you'll need to spam as many invisible chips as possible. As for the reoccurring styles from Battle Network 2, they more or less function the same, but there are some small differences. Guts, for example, now has a machine gun which can be used if the player mashes the B button enough times. However, it no longer has the super armor it was using from the very beginning. You'd have to earn it back by leveling up the style, as it is now a Navi customizer program. Leveling it up further will also let your buster pierce defenses. Shield does not allow you to block attacks like before unless you've earned the shield program by leveling it up. When you do block attacks with your shield, however, proper timing will allow Mega Man to recover a decent chunk of his health, which further adds to his survivability. Custom does not start with 7 chips, he now only starts with 6. Leveling this up will earn you more programs, so you can have more chip slots open to you from the gate. Custom style also comes with a passive ability, where if the player earns an S rank without using their buster or chips in the battle, they can earn a special chip from the fight. Now, I should clarify, what that actually means is that players need to S rank a fight using only their battle chips or the buster by themselves. You can't use a combination of both. I saw this had confused a number of people when it came to this condition, and understandably so because of how it's worded. As long as you obliterate your enemy with the use of a chip of any kind, or by just using your buster, you'll clear that condition. Also, try to remember this nugget of information regarding special chips because we will revisit this later on. Finally, Team Style no longer allows you to use up to 8 Navi chips or Mega chips in this case. Instead, it only allows you to use up to 6. If you want to use more than that, you've guessed it, you need to go ahead and level up up the style and earn these programs. This is also the only way you can get V4 chips from the Navis that you'll encounter. Again, I will be coming back to this. I'm sure you've noticed it by now, but the styles from the previous entry have gotten significantly weaker and in all honesty doesn't feel as powerful as they could be. If you want to restore these styles to their former glory, you'll need to level them up and earn their programs so it feels like their former selves. I can't be the only one who found it baffling that the shield style can't block unless it's been leveled up enough times. Now, this has left me feeling quite conflicted with the style change system this time around. On one end, I love the new abilities the older styles have gained, and we have 3 new styles to play around with. Plus, with the help of mod tools, you can take some aspects of your style and use them as normal Mega Man. Plus, when you take the time to level up these styles and apply specific programs onto them, they can become absolute powerhouses by the time they are perfected, which is something I've appreciated across all the RPGs I've played. Going from having nothing to acquiring massive amounts of power over time was always a satisfying feeling. On the flip side, however, I can't say that I like the fact that the 4 reoccurring styles took a hit for the sake of the Navi customizer. Like, I can deal with Gut style losing its super armor because at the very least it still fulfills its purpose, which is to give you a stronger than normal buster. But shield style not being able to block attacks unless you install the programs just sounds silly to me. Like, Mega, homeboy, what good is that shield on your arm if you can't even use it? And keep in mind, leveling up requires 200 plus battles, and you'll need to level up the shield style twice in order to properly use a shield as intended. This isn't the only issue I've had with how style changes were handled. Unlike how it was in 2, you can't hold on to 2 style changes anymore, you may only carry 1 at a time. Hub style is also reduced to a program you can insert into your Navi customizer, and it's not nearly as powerful as the original while still slapping you with that HP penalty in the form of a bug. It can be nullified, however, if you install the bug stop program. But the biggest detriment is the fact that you are required to use 2 of these styles if you want to enjoy everything the post game has to offer. In true Battle Network fashion, the 3rd game continues its tradition of requiring the player to fill out their library in order to access more sections in the secret area, which will open up once you've cleared the main story. At first, this sounds like nothing out of the ordinary as far as post game chip hunting goes, until you learn later on that if you want to complete the library, you'll need both custom and team in order to do that. Custom is needed to acquire 3 special chips which can only be obtained by these viruses I am now displaying on screen, and they must be S ranked in order to get them. Meanwhile, team is needed for all of the V4 Navi chips, so if you had a style that you would prefer to use, that's too bad. You're going to need to spend time on 2 styles in particular until you've gathered everything that you need. Then you're going to need to fight a lot of tedious battles until you style change into the one that you want later on down the road, followed by fighting even more battles just to level it up and get those programs. I'm likely the minority when I say this, but I'm glad they decided to remove style changing in the later installments and provided a more streamlined gimmick in its place, as all of this grinding you have to do can get old very fast, and I'm sure not a lot of people have the luxury of putting in time to do all of that. There is one last thing I need to talk about before we move on from the battle system, and that is the different type of stages you'll be fighting on. Different stage typings were introduced as early as the first game, and I didn't mention them up to this point because we will get the full brunt of these stage effects when the 3rd game kicked in. Cracked panels will turn into holes once they are stepped on, and holes can be a nuisance most of the time. Without any air shoes to help you out, Mega Man can't step on these holes at all, and certain attacks will no longer work. Additionally, certain Navis cannot step on these holes either, so if you summon one of these guys and they just so happen to land on a spot where there isn't any panels to stand on, they'll just leave you high and dry as if you didn't pay them enough. That's them breaks, I guess. Lava panels are self-explanatory. If the player or an enemy steps on them, they'll take 50 damage, and double that if they happen to be wood element. The only ones that won't be affected by this are units that have a floating property, or if their element is fire. Ice is another straightforward one with an added effect. Unless you're Aqua, you'll find yourself slipping and sliding everywhere, which can mess with your positioning. And if you happen to get hit with an electric based attack while standing on one, you'll take double damage. Grass will allow wood based elementals to heal over time when they're standing on them, but they will also take double damage if they're hit with a fire elemental attack, and the panel will return to normal. This of course is also quadrupled if you happen to be a wood elemental yourself. I mean, Plant Man just outright gets obliterated when I did this to him during the hospital scenario. Swamp are these purple panels which can deal damage over time to anyone stepping on them without floating properties. Holy panels will half the damage of anyone stepping on them, which can really make certain barriers and auras harder to break as a result. Metal panels are immune to being cracked or broken. Sand panels will briefly halt a Navi's movement when they stand on them, and if someone lands a tornado attack on these panels, they'll deal double the damage. Additionally, you can also use a gust of wind that will blow the sand away and damage anyone in its path. As you can expect, different stage types add a whole new layer of strategy to these games, as they will not only affect how you and your opponent will interact with each other, it can also affect how certain chips will behave, some even requiring these conditions to exist before you can even use them. Now let's shift the focus onto other things that Battle Network 3 has done outside of battling. The network continues to use its updates that were introduced in Battle Network 2, such as giving the network different appearances for each section to avoid getting lost, and providing a square where most of your shopping can be done. But they've also added a nice touch to each of these networks with the exception of the internet, which includes a pathway sporting a different color from the rest of its area. It will lead them right to where the net square is located, which further prevents the player from getting lost out here. It is a nice touch that I can definitely appreciate. But that isn't the only thing they've done. Ghost Navis also make a return in Battle Network 3, and they will roam the internet once you've defeated them at their designated spot. Normally, when you defeat a Ghost Navi, you'll now have the chance of running into a stronger version of itself, which is your only means of getting the best mega chips they can provide. But not only you have the chance to encounter them, you also have the chance of running into viruses that will correspond with the element. Some of these roaming Navis will also require you to have certain conditions met before they can even appear, like Bubble Man requiring you to be at low health if you want to encounter him in the beach area because of his cowardly nature. The game also gives its players another reason to hunt these Navis down. If you manage to defeat these Navis once they've got their weight up, you will gain access to certain areas within the internet that are normally blocked off until they are defeated, and these sections can lead to some goodies if you go out of your way to hunt them down. So I would suggest getting a guide ready, buy plenty of sneak runs to make sure weaker viruses don't appear, and enjoy the hunt. Then we have this game's version of the internet, which as you would expect is the area where all the criminals and fearsome viruses are waiting for you. Of all the internets you can explore throughout the Battle Network series, 3 has the most confusing internet to run around in, and yes, I find it more confusing compared to the first one in Battle Network. There are warps, levels, paths that will route you to previous areas you've been just to show up in a completely different area, all while getting pounded by some of the game's most ruthless virus encounters. But hey, at least it's accompanied with a pretty good theme song fitting for a chaotic area like this. Finally, we have the secret area, which is the true gem in this entire game. Once you complete the main story, you'll gain access to another area you otherwise could not explore beforehand, just like how things were done in Battle Network 2. Except you don't need to go through an entire network to get to it this time around. Now, when you think of a secret area that is home to the Undernet King, you're probably going to be expecting something like how things were done in Battle Network 2. Evil looking aesthetic, a theme that gives you a sense of danger around every corner, that sort of thing. But in 3, the secret area decides to go for a completely different approach to that formula by having everything appear heavenly and providing you with a soothing tone which adds to the unsolved mysteries this area provides, truly giving the player a feeling of secrecy that these stages are known for. But don't let this stage appearance fool you, because just like in Battle Network 2, the viruses and bosses that lurk in this area will put your battle skills to the ringer. And combined with the fact that you cannot jack out while you're here, this is an area where you do not want to get caught lacking. Along with the entirety of the secret area, 3 has a lot of post-game content for players to take part in, such as fighting against Proto Man, who is far more difficult in this game than I remembered. I can see why the devs made sure you couldn't fight him until you cleared the main story. Then there are also the quiz quests, the optional side quest missions, which I highly recommend you complete at some point. Then there are also the viruses you'll need to collect in order to produce a special chip from the virus breeder. Oh right, virus breeding. I suppose I should talk about that feature, shouldn't I? So another activity that has also been introduced in 3 and never returned in later installments is the virus breeding. Similar to hunting down ghost navis, you can encounter these special groups of viruses that are hiding in certain sections of the network. Once you've defeated them, the viruses will acknowledge you as their new master, and you can bring them to the breeding station in Scilab so you can produce a battle chip, which will allow you to summon these viruses in the same fashion as a Navi. The only thing you need to be aware of is that when you do, you have to press the A button in order to stop these viruses from switching between their variants, and based on your timing, it's going to determine which variant you will attack with. The damage these viruses can provide is based on two things: the type of variant that you've summoned and how much bug frags you feed these little guys. Honestly though, this whole thing is not worth the trouble. The damage output they can provide, even at their best, is easily achieved by other battle chips and program advances, which is far more straightforward and less of a chore than what the virus breeder does for you. I mainly do it just to get the chips for the sake of filling out my library and nothing more than that. Now, with all the praise and minor issues I've been pointing out so far, Battle Network 3 is holding up very nicely as one of the best entries this series has to offer. But there is a reason why I named this video One Step from Perfection, and it's not just because I wanted to make a nod to another great game that is inspired by this. Style change issues aside, there are some other problems that exist in Battle Network 3 that can hinder a good experience depending on who you are, which I'm about to point out right now. For starters, this game has a lot of busy work. For those who are unaware of what I mean when I say busy work, I'm referring to how often the game requires its players to constantly operate between different menus and setups just to make some form of progression. Throughout the main story, there are going to be instances where the player is required to install certain programs, otherwise they won't be able to clear the scenario or move to their next destination, which can create plenty of situations where you have a nice build in your Navi customizer, only to have to redo the whole thing because you need to shrink Mega Man in order to access other sections of the network. This can cause a lot of pacing issues in the middle of gameplay because you'll need to stop whatever it is you're doing just so you can put in the right program in order to proceed. Now, I understand why it was done this way, as we've seen this tactic used across many video games, which is to provide a solid reason as to why the player should interact with a new feature as often as possible. In this case, that feature being the Navi customizer. But seeing as how the Navi customizer is already directly involved in Mega Man's growth, I don't think any of this forced busy work is necessary. In fact, it would have made a lot more sense just to have these programs as key items so players can keep their builds while they're still able to progress to the game like normal. Another pace breaker this game has is the amount of required chips needed in order to keep the story in motion. Yes, this was something that was done in 2, but it seems to be more frequent in 3, as there are several Navis throughout the story that require Mega Man to collect some kind of chip in order to clear some sections in the main plot, like this Navi needing a longsword E so you can clear the preliminary exams. Here is a pro tip: you can find one of these chips early on in the ACDC area by checking one of these mystery datas. Once you've acquired this chip, do not trade it whatsoever. Otherwise, you will be stuck for a very long time. At least during the other instances where you need a wind special or an ice ball M, the game will tell you where to get those. But that longsword E, no warning or prep time. Either you have it or you better start farming swordies. Then you have this purple greedy Navi wanting a yo-yo G in order to return a folder containing classified information. Again, with these purple civilian Navis being greedy as mess. Forget these guys. This is the face of a real heel Navi right here. These chip fetch quests are sprinkled about in the main scenario as I mentioned earlier, which means in some cases you're going to need to farm a couple of viruses, and depending on your luck, you could be here for a while. Then you have the cryptic fetch quests. You can't have a Battle Network game without having at least one of these present, and 3 is no different. In some cases, there are times where the game won't even give you any hints at all, and you kinda just have to take a shot in the dark, which happened a bit when I was doing some of the ranked quests, or this really confusing moment where the game mentions something about a bird, and after looking through the zoo where that would have been your only interactions with anything bird related up to that point aside from the fishy viruses, which I assume they wanted a chip from those at the time, it turns out to be a piece of origami that's located in a hospital room, which I would have never noticed if I did not look up a guide. Even with all of that being said, this is still not the most egregious thing you have to deal with throughout the entire Battle Network series. Although upon saying this, I have realized that time is drawing near. I know that I have just finished ragging on Battle Network 3 for quite a number of things, mainly because when certain things were introduced, there were a few misplays when it came down to the execution, and the added tedium can definitely turn people off. But despite those issues, the game still holds up very well, as I'm still able to get back to this title and have a stellar time replaying this entry, which I have done quite a number of times already. Battle Network 3 rightfully earned its reputation as being one of the best installments in the list of Battle Network games, and I still recommend it for everyone to give it a try anytime they are able to do so. Well, there you have it. Hopefully you now have a better understanding as to why this game is so beloved. But with that being said, I am now going to take a good break from the Battle Network games before I resume with Battle Networks 4, 5, and 6, so I can avoid getting burnt out from marathoning these games, as playing these titles from back to back can be mentally taxing at times. And with the Battle Network collection upon us, there is definitely going to be a lot more to cover once I return, since a lot of content that was exclusive to Japan has finally made it here in the West. So I'd like to be mentally prepared once I'm ready to tackle these upcoming games. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit me with that siggity sub, and be sure to like and share the video for more exposure, as I'd love to keep growing the channel, and all of the support that you provide is much appreciated. I hope I see y'all in the next one, and until then, play until your thumbs fall off. Peace out, everyone.